episode of Maps of Meaning. And Roger, Claire, and Victor have been doing spectacular job. And we are looking to start with Beyond Order next. So for this final episode, take it away, Roger.
All right. Thank you, Shrikant, and everyone else for joining me tonight. So as Shrikant's already said, you've all made it. We've gotten to the final lecture. And for this lecture, it's going to be a little bit different compared to all the other ones, whereas all the other ones have kind of been introducing a new idea and then kind of explaining how that idea works. For this one, as you've probably already noticed, for anyone who did see the lecture, we're kind of interconnecting all those ideas together and seeing how they all interact within the theory of Peterson's maps of meaning. The title of this lecture is The Force Within. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started because this one's going to be also a lot more information than normal. So we're going to kind of speed through this a little bit. And the first thing we're going to start with is our toolbox and goals. So for toolboxes, basically everything that we've discussed up to this point, but some key points that I'll be referring to and also quickly explaining, but not really going into too much detail. Peterson's idea of the two different concepts of truth, myth as a phenomenological description of being, gods as externalized psychological phenomenons, the idea of chaos and order, and specifically how it relates to the psychological known and unknown domains, nihilism as a loss of faith in frames of references or loss of faith in maps, the totalitarian loop, and suffering as a prerequisite for being, or, life is suffering idea from Buddhism. And as far as goals for this final one is to understand the theory that Peterson proposes and how they kind of all interconnect, understand Peterson's novel model and approach to ethics, understanding how this can help you help prevent ideological possession, which is essentially why he wrote the book. He wanted to give you a method to see ideology from a framework that allows you to kind of understand what that ideology is functioning and why it's so enticing. And the final one is also seeing how this model gives a possible solution to the problem of nihilism as well. And to kind of start with this introduction, because this is a pretty big undertaking, which Peterson mentions even in his lecture, this is the end of a lecture, so it's only fitting that we consider why endings matter. And Peterson notes that the end of anyone's life can be defined or even redefined. The ending of anyone's life can define or even redefine someone's entire life. It's not until someone cannot do anything else that the meaning of someone's life can be understood. This is, of course, an example of how the present can change the past. We've discussed this before with, for example, the cheating wife and how that can completely change not just the fact of what you are, the time you're in now, but all the previous experiences that you've had. And Peterson also notes that this is why there's in the Christian myth, there's an aspect of the salvation till the end of death. The idea that even if you repent and you can be redeemed up until you die. And the whole idea of that is that, as Peterson notes, is like, this seems kind of like a cheap trick to some extent, right? It's like, you can just be a terrible person, go to confession, and boom, you're safe. But that's not actually what's being played out here. And Peterson notes that it actually makes much more sense if you consider it from a more narrative perspective, right? And anyone who's bothered to watch the 70 hours that it takes to watch Game of Thrones can tell you that a story can change completely by its ending. The idea is that the ending is what actually allows for it all to be defined and gives you the context of the entire thing. So as we mark this ending of the series, I would like to take a minute to cover some of the challenges that Peterson's theory has so that we can hopefully get a better understanding of his work. And I couldn't think of a more fitting metaphor. It might have been because someone mentioned it as a question last time, but of a hydra. And as we talked last time, that a hydra essentially tends to be a metaphorical symbol for life, where any solution to life's problems tends to then also create more novel problems. that used to not be there. So the things that we'll be discussing today, you'll often notice that Peterson will solve one problem, and then that creates a new problem that he then works to solve, which then creates a new problem that he works to solve. And that's kind of how he works his way through this. And that's how we're going to go through it too. You'll notice I tried to divide them as much through the slides so you can see the different problems and how solving one problem creates a new one, then creates a new one. And then we'll get to the one at the very end that he kind of leaves alone, and we'll explore why. A couple of other things for introducing Peterson's thought, or kind of wrapping it up, is I do want to highlight a couple of things that maybe we haven't really talked about that are worth remembering. The first is that Peterson's approach to consilience. So in many other interviews and many other talks, you'll often hear Peterson talk about first principles. And all that means is the idea that no matter who you are, in order to understand reality in any way, you need to start by making an assumption, right? Something has to be assumed in order for you to actually have a starting point to make any argument. And you can base your assumptions on a lot of different things. You know, rationality, those are the rationalists. They believe that rationality is the main and best way to make sense of the world. Empirical evidence is the more empiricism or scientific perspective. And there's plenty of different approaches. For Peterson, he uses consilience. And all consilience means is that if you use several approaches and they all seem to point to the same thing, then the probability that that thing actually exists and is real is pretty high. A good example of this would be his bifurcation of the world into chaos and order. You can see that, you know, that split in both mythology, psychology, evolutionary biology, and neuroscience. You can see how that kind of maps on to several different perspectives, which for Peterson is his assumption is that if you're seeing it in multiple different levels of analysis, there's probably something there you're actually pointing to. So just keeping in mind that that's how he's approaching it and that's how he's thinking about this. It's not simply a scientific perspective, and that can really help you understand what his argument is. The second thing, which is something he borrowed from Jung, is this kind of circling method. Peterson oftentimes has been criticized, and since we're going to be reading his book, I'm sure he's going to do this again, where he'll use a lot of different descriptions to describe something. And people will say, it's like, oh my God, he's so redundant. He's just talking about the same thing over and over again. And that's not actually what he's trying to do. What he's trying to do is talk about something that's very complex and that we don't quite have the language to point to. And what he does instead is list a lot of things so that the thing that is common among all of those things is the thing he's trying to refer to. This is, for example, when he's trying to explain chaos, he describes it in a bunch of different ways. And the idea is that the more you circle it, each iteration gives you a better understanding. A good example of this that we did was the story of Genesis. We've gone over the story of Genesis multiple times. However, each time we covered it, we used a slightly different approach. And also each time we expanded the meaning of the narrative and had a better understanding of what that narrative was trying to get to. The final one is the idea of chaos and order. Very useful to understand how humans conceptualize the world. And there's one more idea that's worth considering, and it's the reason that Peterson and Sam Harris spent hours talking past each other. And that is the idea of truth and what truth means. So for Peterson, there's not just one kind of truth, there's two. The first is what likely most of us tend to think when we hear the word truth. It tends to be your scientific facts, right? The domain of scientific facts. In this view, there is a world and it's filled with objects, and you're one of the objects. And within this view, there's also the implication that the objects have no intrinsic value, which just means that nothing has any value in and of itself. And as we discussed, I think it was in the first one, about the collapse of religion, that really gives a big problem, because if science culturally became this belief system that undermined a lot of our mythology and religions, it didn't quite solve the value problem. In fact, it left a vacuum. And Peterson's alternative, or not necessarily his alternative, but what he makes the case is also true and also about should be associated with truth is, he has a lot of different names, but he calls it in this lecture narrative truth. Peterson notes that in fact, that there's another form of truth that we more often use, though we don't really notice, and that's narrative truth, or in the Jungian sense, psychic truth. This is a truth that is being referred to when someone says, live out your truth, right? It means whatever it is that you're experiencing, express that, feel that. And it's essentially to consider what's happening to you now as real. The subjective experience that you're currently experiencing right now, that is the real. And to consider that experience as real, even though it includes things that can't easily be tangible or identified, which includes all the aspects of your emotions, because essentially they can compel you to do things that even you wouldn't like to do, your motivational states, your fantasies, your ideals, all the things that compel your behavior and give you a sense of direction and give you a sense of that life has a sense of direction. For Peterson, this reality is sometimes more real than the materialist reality, though after all, he is a well-established and very well-cited researcher. So by no means is he saying that science isn't right or doesn't have a right to be considered as truth. He simply sees it as two parts of a whole. It's similar to Jung. Jung also saw it as two parts of a whole. And since Peterson is a Jungian, I assume that he probably shares the same idea that in the Jung's perspective, we've simply haven't really given much attention to that perspective anymore since the Enlightenment. And to make this case, or to back this case up in the lecture, he notes that we actually look at when we look at reality, we don't just use our visual systems to see. In fact, what he kind of makes the point is that when we look into the world, what we see is much more in relation to our body and its use than to just some abstract conceptualization. If you look around and pay attention to the things that stick out to your vision and you soften your gaze, you may notice that the things that actually stick out to you tend to be things that you can actually grab. Those are the things that will stick out to you the most if you just look around your room right now and kind of not focus on anything specifically. And the idea is that the reason behind that is you're not just using your eyes. In fact, your eyes are kind of the last thing that actually processes what's actually happening. Peterson points to a chair and essentially points out that when you look at a chair, the parts of your body that you would be used to mechanically use the chair, in other words, to sit down, activate way before your visual system even registers and conceptualizes that you're actually looking at the object that is a chair. You react and conceptualize it with your body and with your emotions before you have any idea of what it is that you're actually looking at. And there's a lot of examples of this. For example, a classic one that we've mentioned a couple times is if you see a snake or just a stick that looks like a snake, your natural reaction will be to flinch or to orient towards it way before you have any idea why you're even doing that. And for that case, almost any flinching, any form of movement that's flinching is exactly that same process, as well as any bad feelings. So someone giving you a bad vibe, or for me, something that reminded me is when I hang out with my single friends at a bar, and they're all women, and they have a creepy guy, right? They don't really, there might not even be anything they can identify, but it's a sensation. Another example would be awkwardness. You can sense awkwardness, but if someone asks you, well, what's going on? Why is it awkward? You have to really kind of run through the entire situation and play out. It's like, well, I guess it's awkward because of this and this and this, but that's not a rationalization that you have right away ready to go. And why is that? Well, wouldn't it make sense to be more rational about it? Well, the answer to that is something about how we've discussed how you perceive the world. Because as it turns out, your motivations define what we perceive. Your motivations and your emotions define what we perceive. We can't even really see the world without emotions and emotional states. After all, we are aiming creatures. We've evolved to be able to throw things and aim things. Our eyesight is actually very reduced to only what we're aiming at, which gives us a pretty big requirement, which means we need to be aiming at something. So what actually determines that? And for Peterson, his point is that our aims are determined by our internal motivations and emotions, which means that rationality isn't superordinate. It actually comes way later. We more often tend to act on emotional reasons rather than creating rational ones. And what I mean by that is that most of your actual movement isn't rational. Most of your movement is emotional and reactive. You can act rationally, but that requires that your system creates a full rational narrative of what it is you want to do and then enacts that. But most of the actions, if you pay attention to your actual body movement, aren't things that you even really rationally thought of. It also means that perception isn't superordinate. In other words, doesn't come first and isn't really in control, because our motivations and emotions determine what perception should even see. And Peterson even makes the claim here that even thought is dependent on our motivations and emotions. In order to have any thought, there must be a mechanism that's deemed that thought to be the one that exists. And it's our motivations and emotions that define our thoughts. Without that, there's no hierarchy, there's no selection mechanism that even determines what it is we should be thinking about. And so Peterson's central point is that our motivations and emotions are primary. They come first. And why is that the case? Well, it's also worth considering, and getting slightly political, but not too much, the postmodern critique here, according to Peterson. There's an infinite amount of ways to interpret the world. After all, when you have an experience, there's several massive limitations that you have, no matter what experience you have. The first limitation is time. No matter what experience you've had, it could only have occurred at a certain point in time. So that already really narrows down your perception window. The next one simply is space. It all has to happen at a certain location. But then those are two very obvious ones, but Peterson points out, and then it starts to get really reductive, because what you then tend to see within a certain slice of time in a specific place, is still limited by your motivations and your emotions, and that defines what you even see. Essentially, the things that you see and pay attention to are only the things that are relevant to what you're currently seeking, or for anyone who remembers, what your subpersonality is currently seeking. And the rest of the world is ignored and put in as kind of not necessary. So what that means is that we're actually very picky as to what we even notice. And that's all, and more importantly, now putting to the postmodern view, it's your interpretation of that limitation of that one place, of that one space and time. And the reason Peterson goes through all this is just to point out just how limited our actual perception and access to information really is. But then he flips it and asks and points out that the alternative perspective, where we see the world as objects, isn't something we're even born with. It's something we slowly have to develop. 8-month-olds don't develop it takes 8 months to even develop object permanence. That's why in this photo I put the peekaboo, is because the reason that game even works is because for the child, they don't have a conception of reality in the sense of they're objects and they don't move and they stay and they're permanent. They have a conception of affect, of emotion and motivations. So when patterns appear, such as a face, that's the fascination. It's the massive surprise, because for the child, when that pattern disappears, the entire entity disappears. There is no conception of the objective world. And Peterson points out that by the time the child grows up to use language, we can't ask them about it because they don't remember how they were able to even develop or what they're experiencing at that point. So if the world presents itself through our emotions and motivations, how do our emotions and motivations shape us, and how do they work? Well, it's also important to remember that they're constantly changing, which creates several interesting problems. So is to consider.
Roger,
Oh.
I have a comment.
Yeah,
go previous ahead. Slide. Can we go to the previous slide?
Yeah.
All right. Now, I used to think that this is an unusual view of Jordan Peterson, but I have discovered that this is actually a very largely, it was a largely held view long time ago. So actually we're doing a full meetup on just that this Sunday at 12 o'clock. This view, the most prominent proponent of this view was Thomas Aquinas. And the way he positions this is that he says, look, animals have this appraisal faculty, okay, of determining whether something is good for them or bad for them, whether they should go towards it or away from it. It gives lots of examples in the animal world. What happens in man is that the appraisal faculty, there is a self-regulatory mechanism on the top of that, which is the conceptual faculty. So he calls it the cogitative sense, which sits on the top of appraisal sense and figures out what is good or bad for us at a much greater level. He's able to, we are able to figure out what its nature is. But the whole thing is that it's the appraisal faculty turbocharged is what the rational faculty or the cogitative faculty is. Now, this is a very integrated view of looking at emotions and reason. Reason as the faculty that directs emotions to be more effective in life. And that's a whole, so there is, so we're going to be looking at Thomas Aquinas' view of that. I've got 3 scholars who are kind of scholars in Thomas Aquinas who have written papers on just that, coming and talking about this. But this is, I'm astonished because it's exactly the same point. Over to you.
No, yeah, and actually just jumping off of that real quick before we go over, because that actually fits really well with Peterson's idea of how consciousness develops, and the idea that it was used to be a first kind of an emergency alert system for quick emergency assessment, but that humans eventually evolved one where we're just constantly running at that level, and that is what creates our awareness and consciousness, and it's kind of like the superseding chooser that deals with anomalies. But yeah, no, that fits very well with that idea. But so just giving an example of how these lenses and how our emotions and motivations kind of frame and limit what we can see, Peterson uses the example of walking into the kitchen and wanting to make a sandwich. You only really focus on the things you need. Everything else is ignored. And the lens you use defines what you see, and you can't help but see the world. You can ask yourself, you can go to a room and to grab your keys or something else, and when you leave it, you can ask yourself a question of what books were on the bookshelf, what was on the bed, what was, and you won't have it, because as human beings, we're so limited in our capacity to observe that we only really keep track of the things that are most relevant to what we're currently doing. And the issue is that our lenses also change because of an internal transformation, because our motivations and emotions change. For example, you may stop being hungry, right? And at that point, the things that are prioritized now have shifted. You may become thirsty, or you're interested in someone or in something. Or someone can even, this actually just reminded me of an example, is when you're talking to someone and suddenly, as you're talking to them, someone attractive walks by and they just stop paying attention to whatever you're looking at and are looking at them now. And you can tell that that's what's happened, right? It's a completely shift in lens. And now whatever you're saying is not nearly as important as this person walking by. Additionally, someone can even tell you a story, and then you can adapt their motivational framework. You can see the world through their eyes, and we can share motivational frames, and that gives us insight into someone else's world. Now, it's also important to note here, and to a much more complex degree, this is how ideologies work, right? It allows you to take on a framework that logically is consistent, but also is a shared framework that allows you to both see friendlies, in other words, anyone who shares the ideologies, and anyone who's outside of that group. Now, another thing that's important to understand is that those lenses also define the objects in the world. Something can be a chair, a step, firewood, a weapon, depending on your motivations and your emotions. Those in turn define what lens you use. The objects in the world are defined by how we're looking at the world. And this is why, for Peterson, he believes that this is actually why we're creative and how we're creative. This is a quote from Peterson's lecture. 100 years ago, if someone were to say, well, you could build a machine on a wafer, a centimeter square out of sand, and if you have enough of those machines, then everyone in the world can be connected, and everyone in the world can have an infinite library of verbal material. And Peterson notes, like, well, that's impossible from sand, but it's also not impossible. It turns out that silica has those properties, and we can build unbelievably powerful machines out of nothing. And to further make this point, it also highlights the connection between alchemy and even science from a Jungian perspective. And the story goes that, this is from Jung's perspective, in the medieval times, there was a lot of concern with alchemy. Jung thought that it was the collective unconscious of the time, realizing that the myth of Christianity was only a redemptive story for the spiritual realm. As a result, people started to dream of something in the material realm that would actually redeem them, and hence the idea of alchemy. And alchemy being before science, and when God was the law of the land, the idea was that if you study the world of God, you can extract from it the thing that is needed for redemption. And this idea, which Jung and Peterson see as the narrative behind science, in other words, the reason why science is even a justified endeavor, or why we see it as something that's inherently good, is that it leads to the idea of the Philosopher's Stone. Well, the Philosopher's Stone was this mythical thing that could turn lead to gold, and that would give you wealth and immortality, mythically speaking. Well, the interesting part is that turning sand into a machine that can increase your wealth, health, and every other dimension of life seems both like an insane pipe dream and a direct description of the reality we currently live in. So the next question then becomes, right? One hydra down, next hydra pops up. What is this nothing that we're building things out of? What is this, what seems to be this array of information that seems to be inexhaustible? And Peterson points out, it seems to be able to reveal a constant array of properties that are unlimited. And you can, to kind of understand what he's talking about here, you can just think of the idea of chaos, right? What is chaos? What is the domain of anything that's unknown? Well, it seems to constantly have more information to give us. Its properties seem to depend on as much on our ability to interact with it as it does with the thing itself. So even things that we thought were completely useless, like oil, right? We might have discovered oil a long time ago, suddenly can shift and become quite useful if we just learn how to manipulate it correctly. So rather than the story world, the narrative truth, being dependent on the objective truth, it may actually be the other way around. If the lens we use to define objective objects in reality, if the lenses we use define the objects in reality, and the objects in reality seem to be limited in their use by our creativity as much as by our ability to manipulate them, that actually implies that the story world, the narrative world, is in some way more real. So as discussed before, this is the nature of chaos, the unknown. It holds all things. So if the narrative world is in some ways more real, what does that actually mean for us? Well, we can start by the most basic question. What's the main challenge of life? And for Peterson, considering the two truths here, if you consider the one of the world of objects, it's an easy one. There isn't one. Objects have no intrinsic value. At best, they can be arbitrarily assigned by humans, but I mean, that's just like your opinion, man, right? Like there's no actual intrinsic meaning behind that. But if instead you consider the narrative perspective, then the world becomes a place of action, a place of what is it that we should do from an individual perspective. And action is the main question of life as to how we should act. And Peterson then takes it one step further, because he points out that, well, the challenge isn't how you should act in every situation. Some situations, especially situations where we know what we should do, in other words, where we understand the domain we're in, aren't actually very hard. You do exactly what you know you should do. But it becomes a very serious problem when you don't know what to do. So the real question becomes, what should you do when you don't know what to do? And that main question is a question that encompasses the most difficult parts of human life. What do you do when you don't know what to do? As discussed before, this is essentially an encounter with the dragon of chaos. This encounter with a complete anomaly. You have nothing to pull from and nothing to count on, but you still have to move forward in some way. And you have no guide and no direction as to how you should act. It's an encounter with something that your entire map not only doesn't know how to deal with, but couldn't even have predicted, a true unknown unknown. An example of this would be 9/11. From the perspective of the object world, the towers just fell and a couple people died. But Peterson points out that when you see, he gives this hypothetical of watching someone continuously watching videos of it happening, and you ask them, well, what's going on? It's like, well, I'm watching the towers fall. And it's like, well, okay, but why do you keep watching it? Like, they're always gonna fall the same way. And he's like, I can't believe it. And Peterson notes is like, when he says, I just can't believe it, what is really being communicated is whatever is being blown up right now exceeds my capacity to model it, exceeds my capacity to truly understand what it is. So I have to keep looking at it and analyzing it just to try to wrap my head around it. Is it the towers that are falling? Is it the 20,000 people? Is it the financial system? Is it the stability of the entire Western world? Is it the beginning of World War III? Because we don't understand how significant this event is in our own story, we can't look away from the anomaly, right? But it's a narrative approach. And Peterson then goes to the next step of, well, how is it that we react when we encounter things like this? And again, we mostly react with our bodies, not our mind or even our perceptual systems, but with our emotions. We sweat, we panic, we get depressed, we feel hurt, we feel shame. And you can really think of this anytime when you're stressed, but you don't know you're stressed, right? And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's experienced this, where you're either flustered or stressed, or you have a short fuse, and it takes your own behavior for you to even recognize that that's what's happening, right? You're already feeling it. You're already acting out on it, but you don't even notice that that's what you're doing. And that's Peterson's pointing out that whenever you encounter chaos, you're not even aware that that's how you're responding to it. That's just but you act it out before you ever fully understand, which is something we've already discussed also. Because when we encounter things that we don't understand, our body prepares, much like when it sees a chair and parts of our body that would normally be used to use that chair activate. Our body tries to do the same thing, only when it does this, it doesn't know what it should be preparing for. So in a response, it prepares for everything, as we'll see in the next slide. Because when you first encounter an anomaly, it's embodied way before you develop an object representation, way before you can actually understand what's actually happening. And worse yet, you may never actually get an object representation of something that's catastrophic. As we've talked about before, there's the collapsing of that map, right? Something that can be so disruptive that it just destroys your capacity to make sense of the world. And you never get out of chaos. Peterson points out to spousal deaths, especially in elderly couples, because when that happens, the probability that the widow or widower will die within the first year dramatically increases. And the reason being that person suddenly and unexpectedly dying is such a great change in the environment around them that and all the strategies that they used to have to adapt to that were all dependent on that person, that the strain that's caused by that psychologically and physiologically is so strong that it does them in. So it's important to understand that chaos is no joke. That when you're in chaos, it's quite literally can be life or death, even if there's not a physical threat of that. It's just the strain of the body itself, because essentially what's happening is your body is in a constant state of duress and stress. And this leads us to one of Peterson's big takeaways here, is that, well, then that's no wonder why people are very defensive about their ideological territory. That is their story for how they see the world. You can't have your fundamental preconceptions rattled all the time, because it puts you in a state of chaos. And as mentioned, the body goes into emergency preparation when it encounters anomaly. It triggers a terrible, panicky, cortisol-ridden stress state, and it's very taxing on the body. And Peterson highlights cortisol and the idea that if you're constantly exposed to punishment or threat, your body will produce cortisol, which is toxic. And the more you produce, the more it kills your hippocampus cells, which are key to memory. The more your immune system weakens, you'll have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, and you'll have higher rates of cancer, as well as in general, it's just not very desirable, right? Like the affective nature of it will not be quite pleasant. So another hydra cut off. It's like, oh, well, it's because we're trying to avoid chaos. That's why we need ideology. That's why we hold on to our beliefs. But new problem here. Well, yeah, sure, that may be the case, but though we can see why ideology is comforting and why it protects us from chaos, but there's also another issue. As we already talked about, we only see a very small fragment of the world, and we have to, as the world is a little bit too complex for us to even really get our head around it. But it's also worth considering how we know anything at all, because all the information that you've ever gathered in your entire life, which has shaped both you as well as your understanding of the world, comes from a direct consequence of your ability to explore the things that you don't understand. And that capacity to explore things you don't understand is unlimited, right? No human has ever reached the top of that. You can just constantly always expand your domain more. So if you have a problem and you can see that's a problem, it's going to be naturally frightening. But there's also a possibility that the source of that problem also contains information necessary for a solution to that very same problem. So though chaos is what terrifies us, it's also what excites us and contains not just all new problems, but all new solutions. So how can we attain the solutions when we are by design avoidant of chaos? To understand that, Peterson asks us to consider the old gods Mars and Venus. And here I'm definitely going to be just skipping through some very complicated arguments, because he asks us to remember how the Greeks believed that we were playthings of the gods, as we covered, I think it was in the third lecture. And the idea that these emotions at the time, because they didn't have a conception of, the psyche in the same way, it seemed as though when you're in love, it seems like something's just pulling you, even whether you want to or not, you're in it, whether it's convenient or not, you're in love, right? And it felt more like a possession than anything else. But we can look at them now, and for them, they saw it as an external force that's coming in and invading you. And it's very easy now to look back at that and be like, silly Greeks. No, that's all in your head. That was just a psychological phenomenon that you're experiencing. And the issue with that is, if you look at the great religions, there still seems to be this idea that there's aspects of something that's external. And what he points out to that is that there seems to be that the idea is still an embodiment of something that is transcendent, an embodiment of something that is bigger than you. If you want to, it might help to think of this as something that Peterson has said in other lectures. What's older, you or war? What's older, you or God or love, right? It's like, these are things that transcend humanity. It's like, if anything, we are the servants of whatever the hell that thing is. And that's how they conceptualize deities. As well as we've discussed before, reality itself, the existence of things, seems to be dependent on the observer. As I mentioned earlier, we don't just come into the world and see the world as objects, but rather we learn to build a model in the first couple of years. And if you don't see things from a finite perspective, then there's nothing that's delineated. In other words, there's nothing that's separated. The reality that you perceive and every possible idea of what you think reality even is nothing but an amalgamation of senses that have evolved to this specific domain. But the idea is that those senses are what creates that reality. Without it, there's a million different ways that you could create a million different versions of that. So the idea is that there is a limited finite perspective as a precondition for being. That amalgamation of those different perspectives is what creates that reality. But if there's, as Peterson points out, if there's going to be delineated things that are small, insufficient, and aware of their vulnerability as part of their limitation, there's going to then suffering is going to be inevitable, right? If you are this small, insignificant thing and you are aware of your own mortality, well, yeah, you're not going to have a great time with that realization. So suffering is almost a part of being. It comes with the territory. So the bad news is, in life, you're going to have a lot of suffering by default. But Peterson asks us to think of the alternative. He asks us to imagine a life where all you have to do is watch TV, eat cake, and have sex. Is that the heaven on earth that we've been dreaming of? Would you be happy if that was the arrangement for the rest of your life? Likely no, because we're all ungrateful and insane apes. And personally, it's the same reason why when I was younger, I was terrified of heaven. Paradise sounds great for the short term, but for all eternity, it very quickly becomes a boring hell. Give us paradise, and the first thing we'll do, just like Adam and Eve and just like Buddha, we'll go looking for the apple. We'll go looking for the snake. We'll go looking for trouble to smash the framework into bits just so we can get access to some chaos and have some fun. So then the purpose of life isn't to avoid chaos, because we actually like chaos. There's actually an aspect of chaos that we really, really thrive in. It's entertaining, it keeps us alert and awake, and it gives us something to do that has no end. So it's not about the frame of reference, right? Because even if we got the frame of reference 100% right, and we're able to prevent all chaos from ever coming into our domain, as we just discussed, that's not really an ideal that we should actually aim for. It kind of falls apart pretty quickly. The goal is to hit a balance between chaos and order. And here's that idea that he then extrapolates to and works on in 12 rules. And it's a balance between being secure enough so that you don't fall apart from all the unknown variables around you, but at the same time are exploring something complex and challenging and novel. So approach to life, cut, new Hydra. How is it that you know you're actually balanced, right? That's the next problem. It's like, all right, cool. You're supposed to be balanced between these two things. How could you know that? And for Peterson, you can actually sense it. So like Marduk and Horus, you watch yourself. Like you don't know everything. You assume you don't know anything about yourself. You see yourself as though you're a stranger. No preconceptions, no goals, no idea of what's good or bad. You just watch yourself and you ask yourself, when am I not miserable? And Peterson notes, more than likely, it's when you're interested in things. And then you can ask, well, okay, what does that mean? When am I interested in things? What is it about that thing that makes me interesting? And you'll likely not be able to really answer that. You'll be like, I don't know. It's just, it catches me. It has a valence to me that other people don't seem to see or appreciate in the same way, but I can't not like it. I can't not be drawn into it. And what happens when you engage in that? And Peterson, so by the way, Peterson views this as meaning. Like he doesn't believe that meaning is some abstract theory that you make up. He believes it's a genuine orienting aspect of the mind. Because for him, and as he points out, when you're engaging in things that are truly meaningful to you, you're not self-conscious when you're engaged, right? You're not even really self-aware. He points out you're actually much more like a child, because that's what a child is experiencing when they're younger. Everything is novel. Everything has meaning. They're curious about the world. And he points out you don't think much about yourself. You actually lose a sense of time, and you can enjoy things for hours. It doesn't get old quickly. You're not aware of your surroundings. None of the existential concerns are paramount at that time. They can definitely come back once you stop doing the activity, but while you're doing it, it protects you in a genuine way. And all other needs are suppressed by your engagement. So you may stay up all night doing it. You may forget to eat while doing it. And Peterson notes is like, well, and if you're not having this very often, you may notice it's like, well, I'm only doing this, for 10 minutes every 3 days, or I kind of sometimes may have experienced that, but I'm not sure. And Peterson points out, no. The fact that that's happened at all, the fact that that can happen is worth paying attention. Because again, some of the axioms that we've already discussed, if your experience is real and real, then the fact that that state like that is possible at all is really worth paying attention to. Because and here's the part that for me is my favorite part, because here's the part he jumps into ethics. He says, here's where your real inborn sense of ethics start to arise. And what does he mean by that? Well, it means that if you really consider, if you found a passion, or if you found things that, in my opinion, I think is the flow state, when you can get in a flow state, if you find out what are the things that truly pull you to that, they might be weird. You may not actually want that to be what your thing. They might not be something that you yourself are very proud of. Your parents might be against it. Your friends might be against it. You might be against it. And yet it compels you. You're still drawn to it. It defines your behavior and is what you're naturally drawn to. And this is reflected by Jung's idea that it's not, as Nietzsche proposed, that we should all become Übermenschen and define our values, but rather that our values must be discovered by us. We already have them, but we don't know what they are. And next hydra down, new problem. Yeah, that's fine. But how do we trust it? And why should we trust it? Because after all, serial killers seem to be really into what they're doing. How do I know I don't end up like that, right? Like there's still a big problem here. Why should I trust this system? How can I trust that internal system? And how do I know that where it's going to lead me, why should be a good place? And Peterson gives this solution. He says, look, you can imagine that the body is like a very finely tuned biological machine, like a computer. If you give a computer false information, what comes out? False information. In computer science is known as garbage in, garbage out, right? You put in bad data, you're going to get bad data out. You're never going to put bad data in and then get good data out. Well, Peterson points out, we're stuck with this computer in our own head, and it's very complicated. You live in it, but you don't actually understand how it works. And worse, we're actually prone to deny information altogether. As we discussed, by not confronting anomalies, sins of omission, all the times you didn't do something you should, you've avoided a data input. You've avoided information that would further orient and help your system orient you better. Or even worse, we have a tendency to lie and over-rationalize our narratives to hide or obscure information we know to be true, especially to ourselves. Essentially, we give bad information or data to that computer. And that's why I put this cartoon, which is, this is your machine learning system. Yep, you pour the data into the big pile of linear algebra, then collect the answers on the other side. What if the answers are wrong? Just stir the pile until they start looking right. And I feel like that's something we constantly do, right? Like we post hoc rationalize decisions that we already chose we want to do, even if we know they're wrong, and just find this narrative that justifies it well enough so we don't actually have to open and look into what we've done. And for Peterson, the idea is, so what if the trust in that system of orientation has to do with our ability to feed it information that's truthful? And why would we go through that trouble? Well, quoting Peterson now, what if the system that orients you can become pathologized by any relationship you have that's not predicated on bad faith? And that's why there's this ethical aspect to this.
While listening to this?
Yeah, I'm done. I totally.
Hello.
I was going to remind you.
I got it. And there are things that can. Sorry. Oh, so, right. So that's the reason why there's an ethical aspect to the redemptive process, right? To this idea of redemption up until the very end, is that there are things that you could do that would engage you in such a way that your own existential concerns would disappear. And what Peterson offers here is a true antidote to chaos, which, for anyone who didn't understand, this is why he named his book this. This isn't just some abstract philosophy that rationalizes your ability to accept your fate. Even biochemically, when you're interested in something, you get an exploratory dopamine release, and it's associated with positive affect, confidence, increased immunological functioning, better memory functioning with learning. And please bear with me on these pronunciations. They're also anti-anxiety and analgesic. And what that essentially means is that if you're really pursuing something that's compelling to you, you're much more resistant biochemically to punishment, disappointment, depression, pain, threat, and anxiety. And Peterson's very adamant that this isn't just blindness. It's not as though you forget that you're going to die. It's not as though you forget your troubles. It's not that you're so drugged up on dopamine that you forget your vulnerabilities. It's your nervous system being optimally tuned to be resistant. So then the next question, and here's the final Hydra, is if you're optimally tuned, how resistant can you be? And what's the upper limits of that? To which that one Peterson leaves alone. That's the edge of where he gets to, and he can't really speak past that because he would say we've only had a couple examples of that, and we tend to call them prophets, right? And to talk about prophets as well as a lot of other stories that we covered, I'm gonna go ahead and invite Victor up here to cover some of the myths that we've talked about so far.
Thanks, Roger. So tonight, let's wrap up the things that we discussed in the form of stories. When we started with looking at a major higher level view of the book. And we started with looking at the chapters in the book, as Roger was alluding to, the idea of experience. We have two kinds of experience. So that's the thing Peterson talks about in the first chapter. The second chapter, it talks about nature of mind and how we experience those things. And then he moves on to the idea of culture, the good, the bad, and everything that comes with the idea of culture. And in chapter 4, it discusses what's outside of culture, what is new, and how we perceive the new. And then he moves on to the idea of an individual and how an individual needs to travel, it needs to make the journey of their own life. So that's where we started when we started discussing this book. And Peterson collects a lot of information from all these various sources: research, philosophy, arts, mythology, theology, history, and his personal and professional experiences. So in this part of presentation, we usually focus on the idea of mythology, theology, and a little bit of literature. And let's bring the whole thing to a kind of conclusion. So when we started with discussing the oldest of the stories that we have, some of the oldest of stories from Sumeria and Mesopotamia. We started with Tiamat, Apsu, and I just would like to say, I apologize if this is too much of a repetition, but we want to come to a conclusion about all these stories that we discussed. And I
Victor,
can also say,
Victor, feel free to do as much repetition as you need, because it's actually extremely valuable to remember all these things and try to connect all of it. So thanks.
oh, got it. Thanks so much. So we started with the stories of Tiamat, Apsu, and Marduk. We started with this oldest idea of chaos and order, how the chaos has been captured and how the new order has come into existence with the idea of Marduk. Marduk is the one that has all the power to speak and power to look, and who has the courage to go ahead and face the chaos. And we saw the similar thing in the next story, which is Mesopotamian and Egyptian story. So that is Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And the story is very similar, only that in this story, we see the hero goes back and rescues his father. So that, in a sense, as we are discussing all these things, and we have, so in a narrative form, the idea of father is represented as the culture. So in this story, hero is going back and reviving his own culture and bringing the new idea to that culture. And also after that, we discuss the story of Moses, and story of Moses also goes through the same idea. So they start, so when we say chaos, so it could be, when we are starting, it can be chaos or it can be a tyranny that we do not like to be in. So in the story of Moses, his culture, his tribe are stuck in a tyranny, and he would like to bring them out, and he brings them out. But when he brings them out, they end up in a desert, and they do not have any kind of rules or procedures to follow. And that's when they discover these rules to go to the new place. And so the idea is to establish the notion that you need a certain structure to go to whatever you are trying to achieve. These are the main stories. And after this, we also saw a pattern in the myths. The myths they consist of three major things. They consist of chaos, order, existing order, and the new order that comes after the hero or the person who goes in and who tames the chaos. And at the same place, we also discover that chaos comes in two forms: a good form of chaos and a bad form of chaos. And order also comes in two forms. Too much of order can lead to tyranny, and no order can lead to chaos. So we saw that structure. And after seeing that structure, we also discussed two major stories: the story of Buddha's enlightenment. Buddha's enlightenment, the story follows the same structure. So he is in this great kingdom of his father, and he goes out. So he gets curious to find out what's outside. When he steps outside, he sees the new things, and then he gets into this state of dilemma, and then he goes and he finds his own enlightenment, and then he comes back to his own culture and he offers that to his culture. So that's the story of Buddha. And in Genesis, there's no, the first three verses does not have any characters or any narrative form, but the structure, the word itself says that God has separated darkness, light from darkness. And then And then the narrative form comes. We have the story of Adam and Eve. They are in a great in the paradise, and the paradise comes with its own rules. And the first humans break the rule, and they get thrown out of paradise. And now, see, this is the narrative form. What the meta story behind it is for us to understand that the first humans are going from an unconscious state to a conscious state. And the conscious state is where they acquire the knowledge of good and evil. It's We can actually think about a child going from being completely a child to their adolescence, to know what's good and what's bad. So in that regard, it can be considered as a certain kind of fall, because now they have the consciousness, and the consciousness comes with two affects. And let's see what those affects are. And right after that, the story that follows Adam and Eve is Cain and Abel. And now we see, so consciousness, it can have a good natured consciousness or the other side of it. And then we discussed three stories. These are more of a cautionary tale stories, where in Cain and Abel, we see the character of anger and envy and jealousy. And we discussed the story of Peter Pan, where Peter Pan avoids any kind of responsibility. He is the hero of lost boys. And we also discussed another story, it's called Cock-a-doodle-doo, where a guy carries a stone for 20 years thinking that it is the gem. And finally, after he finds that that is not the gem. And in the process, he avoids so many opportunities. His friends come and offer so many opportunities, and he does not take those opportunities. Those are the cautionary tales. And these stories, and then we move into more psychological stories. Goethe's Faust. In Faust actually sells his soul to the devil. And in Paradise Lost, Satan itself, when it has an opportunity to redeem itself and go back to heaven, it makes a particular decision saying that I'd rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. This is the notion of not being humble, not seeing the problem in ourselves and closing our eyes to the right thing. And we see a similar kind of, and then we go into this nihilistic thinking, and we see the example from Tolstoy's real life example, where he goes into this nihilistic place where he feels that his own life is not worth living, and it's a cruel joke. And this is the wrong part of the consciousness. Also, there is the other part, and we discussed a few other stories, like the dream of a 4-year-old child, nephew of Peterson. This is from his real life example. And the kid, when in his dream, when he was asked what he would do when he was posed with a challenge, he says he would go and attack the dragon and get to the end of it by going into the dragon and killing off all the miniature dwarfs. Yeah. So that's one story. And the second story we discussed about Jolly Tailor, a tailor who goes into a new village and finds a problem, the problem of never-ending rain, and he sees the problem, and with all the faculties that he has, with all the skill sets he has, he steps outside of his own comfort and goes in and fixes the problem, and then he becomes the king and also wins the princess. That's another story. And also we saw the story of King Arthur. King Arthur, although he is a king, he is also a knight. And the most important thing is when they are looking for the Holy Grail, where they look for, they look at a place where they find the place is the darkest. So that's the idea. So we have two kinds of stories here: the stories that we want to look up to, and the cautionary tales. And these are the stories that we discuss. We discuss these because we wanted to establish how we experience our own life. What is chaos and order in our own life? And where is the place that we are waking up? And when we wake up, when we have this consciousness, and so what is the power of that consciousness? There are two sides to it, and how to get to the right side of it. And at the end of the book, Peterson ends with this particular quote. And this is from Nakamari's, one of the Gospels, Gospel of Thomas. And it goes like this: if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And that's the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So, in conclusion, and to wrap up, you are always going to encounter anomalies, and you're going to have every reason to avoid them. Naturally, you're going to want to run. Your whole body will want to escape, and for good reason. Anomalies can kill you, or worse. But there's also one good reason why you shouldn't. The anomaly is also everything that you don't understand. And Peterson uses one last example, and it's an example of having someone from a long-term relationship betray you. How could that be a good thing? How could knowing that be a good thing? You have every reason to avoid it, because if they betrayed you, it could mean a million things. And, you know, it could be that you're too naive for your own good. It could be that maybe you let people in too easily, that you're not actually careful with your relationships, or that you don't know how to treat people right, or that you don't have a good conception of yourself. You don't even understand yourself well, or that maybe there's something wrong with you in the sense that you constantly are chasing the wrong people, or maybe you're fatally attracted to the wrong people. But there is one good reason to do this, is that all of these are painful to learn, but if you don't learn them, they're gonna get worse. And each one, the solution lies in its confrontation. So Peterson finishes by giving advice on how do you deal with a dragon? How do you deal with an anomaly? How do you deal with something that you don't know how to deal with? Because when you see it, yeah, it's definitely a dragon, and no doubt it's gonna eat you. But if you don't let it eat you, or if you don't at least confront it, there'll likely be another one, and it'll probably be bigger. And if you get eaten enough times, then you're probably not going to be around. You're not going to want to be around much. And maybe you're not going to be willing to help others be around much either, which ends up being the alternative. For Peterson, not taking responsibility leads in the direction of the spirit of Cain, as we've talked before. If I refuse my faults, face my flaws, then I must lie to myself. As we have seen before, talking about the authoritarian loop, as well as the rationality of anti-being, if you are being tormented and you are convinced that it cannot be you, then it truly is you against the world. Thank you, guys.
Wonderful, folks. So now we're going to go to the breakout rooms. I'm going to give a little bit more time, about 25 minutes in the breakout rooms, because what I want to do is, here are the rules for the breakout rooms. This is the end of this series. So would like to hear your reflections on the series itself, not just this particular meetup, but what you've gotten from the entire series. So you got 25 minutes to discuss amongst yourself. Please start the breakout rooms by giving each person 2 minutes to talk about their takeaways from this series. And then follow the rules, keep on topic, be brief, be courteous, encourage others to speak. If needed, click on ask for help and I'll help you. I'm going to start the breakout rooms now.
For your presentations, really appreciate it.
Hi there.
Hey.
All
Nice
right.
recount.
All right. So here are all the facilitators. All right. So what I want to do is I want to take this to, okay. So let me make my pitch for what I'm trying to do. Okay. So firstly, in this entire 52 living ideas, I think we have built a fantastic community. I just love it. But nowhere is the community strong as it is in the Jordan Peterson group. Hardly it is because Jordan Peterson is a philosopher who covers everything, from biology to mythology to philosophy to science. It just goes all across. And he goes very deep. He also speaks to the current issues in the most powerful and direct way. So that's why this community has much greater cohesion than the other communities. Now, what I want to do is I want to take it further. Okay, I want to see what can be done, because this is a new medium, Zoom. We are we are in many different places, but we are able. I'm astonished. When I started talking to Claire about starting this, and my whole purpose was to basically replicate the experience that we had in our New York in-person meetup to online. Okay, and I think we've done that, but I want to go beyond that. Partly, I want to go to the next level, move towards the New York community a little bit more. Okay, and the way in which I had done that in New York is that New York, we were faced with this very challenging problem. We used to get between 60 to 80 people showing up, okay, every Saturday for 5 hours. Okay, that's a lot of people for a lot of time. And we used to meet in public space. So at 80 or 60, you can't hear anybody anymore. They're too far apart. A speaker can speak because it's like unidirectional. You're kind of pointed the right way and you can speak loudly, but most people couldn't hear each other. So what I did was that I created a new community, a dead community called Intellectual Marketplace. And all the best thinkers, people who are the most serious and most curious and most energetically pursuing their own learning, I call them to come 1.5 hours before the actual meetups. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to replicate a version of it here. So we would come and we would discuss the topic in great amount of detail. Okay, each of these people were giants. Okay, they were amazing people, and they would all bring in all these things. We would put it together, and then we would boil it down to 3 questions at the end of it. And when we were there, another like 50 people descended on us. We would divide into groups, small groups of 6 people, and one person from each of the from the intellectual marketplace, 1 or 2 people, would moderate each of the groups. So the level of discussion in that breakout group that was there was really amazing, because each person would bring their own character to it. It was like their group. Okay, so it's like running separate meetups for 30 minutes, each of you. Okay, but there is commonality of those 3 questions, which are arrived at after the best of all the thoughts that we have. Now, I want to do it in a more compressed manner. So we'll come only half an hour before. So instead of, when regular meetup is at 9 o'clock, so we'll meet at 8:30. If you can't show up, that's fine. We'd give you the 3 questions at the end. Again, I'm going to get already about, I think 12 people have signed up for this. How many are, these are 11 people? there is, I think a person missing is Jade and Zach. Both of them are incredible people. Okay. Maybe one person I'm not remembering, but what we're going to do is we're going to discuss like this, and we are going to say, okay, what are the 3 questions we should talk about? Okay, so that's one thing. And then you would have 30 minutes and you can run the breakout groups as you see fit. Okay, because what I want to do, what this will end up doing is that it will move the breakout rooms to a completely new level. Because with the moderation, because it's kind of, I've chosen you guys for 2 things. One is that kind of your knowledge and your understanding. And second, a level of social skills. Okay, you need some level of social skills, where there are people who are very, very good at thinking, but don't have enough social skills to actually moderate. And it's very easy to moderate this group. Most people are going to be very well behaved. And I want to hear your feedback on the breakout room so I can move the breakout rooms to a new level. Okay. And that will spread across all the meetups. Okay, so I'm doing this for Jordan Peterson, but what we learn, we are going to be able to spread out. I'm telling you from my experience, our experience, and now here, Claire, Becky, and Jonathan are part of our kind of original New York group, so they can attest to that initial discussion is going to be the best discussion, because it's going to be very high quality. Okay, but I've deliberately kept it short, so we don't, because we're starting at fairly late at night, so I don't want to put too much time. We don't have 5 hours. Don't want to do that, because in New York we had 5 hours. We'd spend 5 hours. We'd get together at, I think, 12 o'clock or something like that. People would show up at 1:30. From 1:30 to 4 o'clock would be the meetup, and then after that we would go to Starbucks to continue one-on-one discussions. Okay, so but what I'm saying is that I want to get flavor of that. I think the community that is going to develop is going to be at a completely new level as a result of that. Okay, so that's the plan. Now, the format of the meetups is that, so we'll pick 3 questions. When people come in, we will start by giving everybody 2 minutes. So this is again the format that we have used when we have read books together, whether it is 12 Rules or Thinking Fast and Slow or Growth Mindset. We've done many books this way. 2 minutes, everybody will get 2 minutes, but facilitators will get 3 minutes. Okay, so you got 3 minutes, so you don't have to prepare too much, but don't try to, the rule is that you're not trying to summarize the chapter. Everybody has read the chapter. You're just picking something that you found interesting and useful, that you found really profound, you found that is going to make an impact on your life, and just talk about that for 3 minutes. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to intersperse your presentations along with everybody else. So there is it's a flat structure that way, where initially everybody gets to put their 2 cents on the table. Then we go directly into the breakout rooms, use those 3 questions to have a discussion. We are going to do a decent job of choosing those 3 questions. Okay, that's going to really capture, with all our heads together, those 3 questions are going to capture heart of it. And then when we come back, people are going to talk about their takeaways. And then we're going to look at the patterns of observations that come in and discuss from there. Okay. Now, I don't know. I think this is going to be really, really good. Okay. And we're going to see what an online community can do. That's what I want to do. So I want to shoot for the moon. Okay. So if you have any ideas, as I was telling Claire, 80% of my ideas are useless. Okay. But the moment I speak it, I can find it at least and if I don't, somebody else will tell me. So I don't even have to try all the 100 ideas on people like guinea pigs to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Okay. About 80% of them 80% of the mistakes can be gotten out. I do make lots of mistakes. Okay. So feel free to give me ideas. As again, we have done during this meetup, we've done 40,000 hours. I've done 40,000 hours of meetups, okay, since COVID started. And so I have enough amount of experience in my brain. So I'm able to tell what might work, what might not work a little bit. And I'm going to use that. But I think the breakout rooms are going to go to a completely new level. you guys are going to set standards of what can be done in 2 minutes for everybody else. And you will find that I have found that again and again, people rise up when challenged. So don't dumb anything down. Just shoot for the moon all the time, both in kind of what you are saying and what you do in the breakout rooms. Consider those breakout rooms as your own and try to figure out, ways of doing things. Use your creativity, and then share with me what you're learning from it, what is working, what is not working, and whatever is working, we will go ahead and spread it across us here, and then maybe across other meetups as well. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. So now I've said my piece. So tell me what you guys think. Who wants to go? You can go ahead and just speak up, just unmute and speak up. This is a breakout room. So,
Shrikant, so it sounds really good, and I'm really excited to see this new format. So I haven't seen this in real life. I mean, so offline. So I have a question here. So
sure.
We start the meetup, and once we are in the Zoom session in the main room, and then we disperse into different rooms, and there we discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And do we come back
yes.
and discuss again?
Yes, just like everything else is just the same. The only difference is that we have this 8:30 to 9 o'clock pre-meeting, and then we will always have 3 questions, and the breakout rooms will be moderated. After the breakout rooms, we come back for takeaways, just as always.
Okay.
Shrikant, question here is, so we have there are 12 moderators, and you're thinking that we're in the is it too ambitious to try to create 3 questions in talking to 12 people in just a half an hour?
Oh, that's very easy. We've done that many times. We usually do that for 50 people. With the intellectual marketplace, we had like maybe 30 to 40 people doing that. So that's not going to be difficult, because what happens is, it's kind of like, when you see it, most people, when they see a good question, they will say, oh, that's a good question. They will just drop their questions and say, oh, that's a good question. So everybody, whoever has come up with questions, will put the questions at the table, and then we will, I think we'll have a lot of agreement very quickly.
Right.
It's not
okay.
going to be difficult at all. Who else?
So
Like,
I have a question.
go ahead.
So it sounds great. I'm excited about it. The facilitators are predicated on the idea that we're going to have more people coming, 60, 80, maybe 100. And so are they all going to be given an opportunity to speak about takeaways after the breakout?
Yes, but it will be by volunteers. So whoever wants to, just like everybody will press exclamation mark, whoever presses exclamation mark tends to, gets to go. And I will moderate the time. I will control the time. If, for example, all 60 people want to speak, maybe it won't be 2 minutes, it will be 1.5 minutes or 1 minute, something like that. So I'll play with that based on that. And I'm deliberately, and if you know anybody whom you think should become a facilitator, go ahead and always recommend to me privately. Secondly, what happens is that most of the value is in actually thinking about it, planning and running it. So sometimes what will happen is that we'll have fewer people, in which case 2 of you may be in one of the rooms and you will be kind of sharing the responsibilities. Sometimes you will have a lot more people in your breakout rooms. But because there is a moderator, it can handle between 6 to 10. You can handle between 6 to 10 people. That's what we have found. But I'll keep on increasing the number of people, in this group. And I look for recommendations from you as well.
One thing I've liked in the past is the very last thing you mentioned, which was the looking for patterns in the takeaways. And you seem to be doing that with your notes. I thought that was great. Is that going to continue to do that?
Absolutely. We'll do that. We'll definitely do that. And that's where most of the value is. You know, I encourage you guys also to keep track. I will also keep track. And I will, you know, I'm very ambitious about this. You know, it's like, let's see what we can do, because you know, we may be able to actually, you know, prepare like PowerPoints on the fly or something like that to put together what everybody's saying. That's what I'm thinking of doing. I've tried it a couple of times, but just it's incredible stuff. And what I want is that I want this thing to be, see, I look at it almost like it's an event, it's a show, and we are actually producing something that's extremely compelling to, you know, people should feel, you know, I'm glad I lived through this. And I want people to feel like that, you know, throughout. You know, every minute should be like that. And then if we do that right, then it will have the same impact on YouTube. And it is going to, I know Claire is going to be doing stuff, marketing, I'll be doing some marketing, and we'll keep getting more people. Zoom can handle up to 500 people. So I don't have problem, you know, I think, yeah, I've gone up to 150 people in Zoom and it works beautifully. So I think up to 500 we can handle. So we can scale this up quite a bit. I don't know how much we'll scale it up, but we'll see. That kind of depends on the market and depends on the interest of people. But I want to produce something which the videos will be proud of, say 5 years from now. That's what I'm trying to do. And I am, you know, my philosophy remains the same. You know, I'm basically the body keeper for time of everybody who's here. And we'll, you know, you should regard yourself like that in the breakout rooms. Just make sure that every, you know, valuable things are being delivered. That's it. That's it. And again, I'm there, you know, if there is any serious problem, I'm always there. And I'll make all of you co-hosts so you can move people around. You'll have magical ability. There will be like a waiting room. So you can just move people into the waiting room if they start causing too much trouble.
So I got a question.
Yes.
In my experience with discussion groups, that every now and then we can get stuck on, or things can get heated when it gets to politics. So do we have any, how should we handle situations like that? Because I'm sure they're going to arise where it's just by the nature of the very person who we're talking about. If there's disagreements or if things start to get really, are there topics that we essentially should be wary of, is essentially what I'm asking.
In general, I would, you know, I always recommend that, you know, there are so many opportunities of talking about politics in so many different forums. This is not a forum for that. So if that's what you want to do, you know, please do it elsewhere if you can. Sometimes politics comes up naturally and I don't, you know, I don't object to that. But it's like people go, if especially what happens is that two people start going at it, or one person keeps going too much, you can say you are off topic. Okay, let's come back to the topic that we are discussing. If two people come at it, you say, look, there are plenty of forums to explore that. Let's not do it here. The topic is this, and the questions will take care of itself. They're supposed to be answering those questions. And if it goes too far away from the questions,
can we just put them in a waiting room and let them duke it out by themselves so I don't have to hear it?
No, put them. I'll keep two waiting rooms. So you can put one on one and the on the let them duke them out.
I'm out.
Yeah, put them
Democrat and
in
Republican
their own room.
Right.
Just put them in their own room with no explanation.
Yeah, and you know, be a little bit patient, but not too patient. I give a little bit, the way I put it is that I give people enough rope to hang themselves. Okay, you have to give them enough rope to hang themselves, where whenever you act, it is apparent to at least half the people that you're doing something justly, that you had to do it. You don't want to do it. I mean, sometimes I kind of have a very good feel for this. So even when I spot that, okay, this is not going well, this is really going to cause, I will not act until there is enough on the table where many people can see that what I'm doing, because I don't, above all, I don't want anybody to feel that they can't speak their mind. Okay, that's very important to me.
I just wanted to chime in for a minute here. In
in my other group, a lot of the topics that I end up discussing get to be, it's so easy to slide into politics. What I usually do, or something I do often, is I will, kind of pat them on the head while steering them in a different direction. So I'll be like, that is a fantastic point. And so on this topic, and like they're so busy feeling warm and glowy from being patted on the head that they don't entirely realize that I've changed the subject on them. So
Maritza, not everybody has the charm and the suave sophistication that you have in redirecting things.
Unless it's Joe, the one person that I totally lost my suave and coolness was poor Joe Bullock. Joe, you remember that when I told you that you were, what did I tell her? Is it okay if I repeat what I said to you? He's saying,
go ahead.
I told him, with all due respect, you're a white male property owner who's above 6 foot tall. So please sit down and be quiet. It was not my finest moment.
Becky.
Yeah, I find that because we've already agreed on your rules to always redirect back towards that, and it has been quite effective.
Yeah, those rules are very, very powerful. And those are the rules, it's been 5 years. So 20,000 people online, about 40,000 hours online, and maybe about 20,000 or 25,000 hours in person, person hours. So that's what, those rules have gone through. And I've kind of kept on tweaking things a little bit, but, so use them. They work very well. I'll post them before going into go ahead, Vicky.
And there was this one rule which you don't use anymore because our groups are small enough, but sometimes when there's one person dominating the conversation, I'll pull it back out. It's like, oh, well, let's try to let 2 other people speak before you speak again. Yes. So that one can go around. I really like, that's my hidden one from
right. And other thing is that, see, some of you are going to be better at moderating than other people. And so we'll share whatever we learn. If you notice any problems, just go ahead and voice them. So we'll have a chance to talk about those things too. And I think all our skills are going to go up. So there's just so much to be gained in so many different ways. Make sense?
Selfishly, I would love, like, if there was some way we could have access to each other during the week. I don't know if it's like a group chat or a WhatsApp group or an email thread or something, just like, I'm just excited to start reading. And I don't know if there's something we could set up.
Let's not do that in the beginning.
Okay.
Let's try to kind of, because what I want to is I want to keep the investment from everybody low.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And what happens is that we'll make our full effort while we are here. If anything, I can add another 15 minutes for us in the beginning, like 8:15 or something. I don't want to do that. I want to do it with 8:30 because I just want to concentrate everything.
Totally.
Because, what I find is that works very well because I've tried to, as you know, we've tried to go kind of online and do stuff. Doesn't work that well. So, let's do it in person and go from there.
Okay.
Do you plan on having these, we'll have now several different breakout rooms, each with a facilitator. Will the composition of each breakout room be made on a random basis, so changing from week to week?
Yeah, it'll change from week to week. It'll change from week to week.
Okay.
I have a quick idea. We could have like a shared Google Doc or sheet where we can just write in our questions for the week ahead of time so that people can just have a general idea of what we want to discuss in the 30
No,
minutes.
let's surprise ourselves.
Sure,
See, the important thing is that, this is a personal quest and a social quest. So what happens is that during the week, we think on our own. And we bring, what happens is that we bring our own take to it with a very deep way. I don't want that to be influenced by each other. I think we'll produce a less value if we did that. Okay, so I think this is a really powerful medium. So we'll make most of it. All right,
And,
folks.
Really quickly, one quick question. If the book it comes out on the 2nd and
Mhm.
it doesn't get here till like the 4th, that it's possible that it might not get there till the 4th.
That's fine. What
Okay.
we're going to do is that there is the introduction video
Okay.
by Jordan Peterson. So we just watch that.
Okay.
Anybody who didn't get the book, I'm getting it on Kindle first, so I'm going to get it that
True.
night. So I'm
Book arrives, but a dog eats the book. Is it still?
It's-
dog eats the Kindle also.
he's at that point, then you deserve to lose the book.
Our dog gets so wise by that.
Now, Shrikant, for those of us who can't make it early, but are dedicated to comment, can we email you our points?
No,
Or-
no. The thing is that if you're not there, then what you do is that we will look at the questions that everybody else has and just put it together. Or okay, you can go ahead and you can go ahead and message me on Meetup, and I will put any questions that you put on the table for consideration of other people. How about that? Make sense? Okay. So I've started closing the breakout room, so we'll end up in the main room in 54 seconds.
Can I use my timer for mine?
I'll get some water.
Sure.
Perfect.
Wait, how do you got?
There's a free thing that you can download. There's just two
Okay.
programs. It's OBS and SNAS. And
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
You should utilize that.
I love that your clock sometimes says change topic, bucko.
yeah, that's yeah. Let me see if I can reset it to that. It's like
Perfect.
but
All
yeah,
right.
it'd probably be useful to control people from talking too much.
This is OBS, right? OBS is very powerful. Welcome back, folks. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about our takeaways. So the plan is to talk about the takeaways. Then I'll have, after the takeaways, I'll have Victor, Claire, and Roger make any concluding comments about this series. And then we're going to give you a preview of what is coming up with Beyond Order and how we're going to do it. We have a plan for going through the book in a way in which we have never gone through a book. So that's what is coming up. All right, so if you would like to share your takeaways, go ahead and type ! in chat. This is the takeaways for the entire series, okay? As always, we got the 4 rules. Type ! in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Rule number 2, keep on topic. Rule number 3, be brief. Rule number 4, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. All right. So what did you guys think of Maps of Meaning? You can talk about your experience of reading the book. You can talk about the meetups, or you can talk about today's meetup, whatever you prefer. All right, who'd like to go first? Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't collected all my thoughts yet. It usually takes me some time, but I really liked the way Roger tied everything together this time. I really enjoyed that because I feel like I walked away with a package of understanding that, will take me further. And I'll definitely reflect on all the lessons. So there were a lot of life lessons in this whole series, and I enjoyed our break room discussion as well. So I've enjoyed it very much. And I want to say too that I appreciate so much time that you all put into this for us. Very, very thankful for that.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is Jyoti.
Yeah, actually, Judith and Kevin and I were in the same breakout room, and we were discussing the book and today's presentation. And one of the things that we talked about was the end. If you have made mistakes in your life and you've done wrong things, my understanding from Roger was you can't, or maybe not today, but one of those sessions was that you can't make up for all those things that you had done wrong in the end. And if you can't wake up or can't do that, then it's a terrible thing to have that burden when you're dying, to have all that on you. So can you, not that I have made mistakes and bad things I've done, but I have made mistakes, and to me, it was not a mistake. That was the best option available. But maybe to people who around me, my options were not good options. Let's put it this way. And if I have to keep taking that on my grave, after being such a good person in my life, so
No, well, the idea is that there is a redemptive aspect, right? That there is a way to get back, one, to do things in such a way that it alleviates your existential suffering and fear, but then also that can redeem you in the sense of attempting to fix all the mistakes that you've done that you can fix. I also believe that those sins, for lack of a better term, I think that's what the concept of the afterlife aspect of hell, right? That your soul will be damned for all eternity, is what was written, and there's nothing that can be changed once you're gone because the writer's gone, right? So for the rest of eternity, that is you, and that has to be owned as you. And that's part of what Peterson says about taking on the true burden of existence, because if you pretend like none of it matters, you're going to live a life up until you're about to die, and you realize that what if everything did matter and you just never paid attention? And now for all the rest of eternity, that was all you was, and all you ever will be was that, right? So that's the true burden of existence, of truly taking everything on as though every single thing really matters.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Joe. Laura. Laura, you need to unmute yourself. What did you get from this discussion?
Well, I think the whole thing has been really wonderful. You've done a tremendous job in your presentations. And all I want to know, you're going to produce Cliff Notes, because I couldn't follow all of it. It was too much information for me, either tutorial services or Cliff Notes or, this for dummies, because I really want to understand it more. But so.
I can share my slides with all the notes and things I talked about. I think that'd probably be more helpful for a lot of people, because I also know I was just kind of running through, especially towards the end.
Sure. Let's do that. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Maritza. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I just want to say thank you to, everyone, Roger, Victor, and Claire, for presenting. I mean, this is a lot of time and a lot of information each week, and it was communicated in a way that was really digestible and gave me a new understanding of Jordan Peterson, but also it opened up my eyes to specifically what chaos is and how to engage with chaos. And it's meaningful in a number of different ways. I actually see its practical applicability, specifically in systems modeling and how we orient ourselves and how we look at the world. The other thing that I would actually walk away from is the idea of challenging my own maps of meaning and how important that is in understanding other people, but also as a way of continuing to learn, from not only looking at my experiences that they're not necessarily something as the only way to essentially see the world, and just how dangerous it is if we only look at them from one perspective. I think the power of myth as well, and the limitations of myth have also really kind of come out of this. I've seen that in a couple of different other areas in addition to this. Specifically, we were talking about a discussion with something called George Paley and the idea of evolution and how he used the idea of stories to actually essentially talk about what is known as the, essentially the modern movement for intelligent design. And I think that that also was an interesting aspect because I saw a lot of what Peterson was talking about in his scientific approach. And that was something outside of here, but I just wanted to pull that in as well. Also, the Great Father is, and Mother, and then how we engage with our own personal dragons. All of these concepts to me, they're actually very useful on a personal level, but I also see this again, how this can actually play into analyzing systems. And I think that's my biggest takeaway as well. And I think the third lecture, when Roger even talked about the difference between some of the systems that can essentially evolve faster than others. And, when you're talking about even in economic systems, the importance of that was something that clicked as well. It doesn't mean there's a best system per se, but it's a distinction between the different economic systems that we know about. So, yeah, that's basically it. So, I mean, there's a lot to take away. This is something that, you go through once and then you really go through it again to really figure it out. And I'm glad these are online, and I'm eternally grateful to everybody who took the time to lead.
Thank you, Joe. I want to say, responding to Laura's comments, when you look at maps of meaning, I think what Roger, Claire, and Victor have done is that it is cliff notes. I mean, the thing is that the book itself, and compared to the book itself and reading the book itself, I think these guys have made it far more accessible. They have kind of taken out themes and presented those themes very carefully and with lots of illustrations. So it is a very complex field, so it can't be made too simple, but I think they have taken a very good step towards that. Next up is going to be Maritza, Jonathan, and Andrew. Maritza.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this journey that we all embarked upon a few months ago. I really did. I read the book, and I'm a little bit crazy. I also have it on Audible because you can't just read it once. And I have also watched his 2015, 2016, and 2017 videos, in addition to the half-hour video here today. But partially because I'm crazy, but also because I needed more nuggets to kind of put things together. What I come out with here at the end is I'm so just amazed that there's all this data, all of these examples, and these so much for us to unpack. And he's given us not that it's a basic concept, but I mean, you can break down this huge work of art into the simplest of admonitions. He ends by bringing things together and saying, this way, all this way, that's not quite right. All this way, that's not quite right. Maybe what we need is to find a middle ground. And you're like, oh my God, can it be that simple? Is this 700 tome? Is that what he took 700 pages to tell me? And the beauty of it is that it really, it's that simple and that difficult. what he's telling us is that we need to let go. In some instances, we have to allow things to fall where they will. Life is suffering, deal with it. If you voluntarily accept it, then you put yourself in the driver's seat. Don't let life happen to you. Grab it and live it. And you can't live it if you're hiding from the demons and the dragons. And you can't live it if you're pretending that all those who came before you didn't bring something to the table and that you're not standing upon your ancestors' works. If you acknowledge those things, it's not going to make you lesser. It's going to probably make you tremble a little bit because it's scary, right? But when you acknowledge these things and you understand that without embracing culture, you cannot be an individual. And conversely, without being an individual, you cannot benefit your community and your culture. When you can acknowledge these things and you can shy away from the lies and the subterfuge, well, that's when you begin to live. And that's the sweet spot that I see Peterson trying to guide us towards. And he gives us all this great material. And the reason I say it's that simple and it's that hard because everything in moderation, right? If you have one really good glass of scotch, it's amazing. It sits perfectly. It warms you up. You sleep phenomenally. Have 2 or 3 of those and you might be talking a different tune. So, you know, Nietzsche says to us, and this is actually something that Peterson has used this quote: if you have a why, you can bear any how. So in addition to moderation, what he's telling us is that you need meaning and things that are meaningful. And we struggle. What the heck does that mean? He tells us, okay, maybe meaningful is like this huge, scary word. Look for what interests you. Listen to yourself. Watch yourself. And as you watch yourself, find out what catches your attention so much that you don't even notice that time is going by. You forget that your feet hurt. You forget that it's cold outside. You forget all those mundane troubles just fade away. Not because they no longer exist, but because what you're doing is just that interesting. And so Peterson tells us, if you find that which is interesting, that's where you're going to find the connection for that which is meaningful to you. And as you go molding that, you're going to find that sweet spot, which is really what it's all about. And yeah, so these are kind of my takeaways from the book. And I have enjoyed walking through this with all of you, and Roger, Claire, Victor, just amazing. And I'm just really appreciative to have been here for the ride. We embarked upon a transformation process, and I'm loving it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Maritza. Thank you. It's great comments. Next up is Jonathan and Andrew.
Yes, I just want to say, thank you to Roger, Claire, Victor, and
Jonathan, you need to speak up. We can barely hear you.
sorry about that. I just want to say thank you to Roger, Claire, Victor, and Shrikant for a wonderful, course. Thought it was excellent, very well done, and everything from the way topics were described to the presentations. I just think it was, it's not an easy thing to do, to distill this book. So thank you. And also, I just wanted to sort of share a takeaway. I guess this is more just sort of the most recent takeaway. So, but one of the topics talked about today was or in this sort of section was how our stories are basically our reality. And I think that's sort of like one of the big insights Peterson, or the big lessons that Peterson says, is that in our modern society, we have this idea that like reality is this objective thing, and then we have this mental model that we layer on top of it to navigate reality. And what Peterson is saying is that no, actually, that perception is tied up in our reality. There's no real getting out of that. There's no real getting out of the subject observing the reality and the stories we make about it. It actually flavors it. And he sort of uses this to make this argument about why people become ideologues, or why people get so caught up in ideologies, or just in general, when you sort of question someone's premises, what that actually does. Like, he sort of creates this whole metaphysical dynamic of what happens, why we feel so disturbed when somebody takes an idea we've held for a long time, or an assumption, and sort of knocks the legs out of it. And I thought that was a really profound insight and very useful. And I think it's something that took me personally a long time to intuit and realize and sense, that all the time we're sort of subtly, we have this sort of metaphysical world that we're very protective of, that we don't want to see disturbed. That when it does disturb, it's very unsettling, and it could be, I think, in some ways, I think he says it's sort of like a death in a way. When our metaphysical world dies, we die in some sense, and that's why people get so bent out of shape when it's not something physical. And I think that's for me, that's like the biggest lesson taking away from this maps and meeting, is that these maps are as real as flesh and blood to people. They are that significant, and that by leveraging that realization, that insight, we can go out through the world and be more mindful of when we're talking to someone or coming. And let's say you have different ideas about something, and you say something and they sort of feel uneasy, and there's cognitive dissonance. You can kind of navigate that better because you understand that iceberg that's going on. So that was my big takeaway, and thank you guys for helping me, realize that. And I, and also thanks for everyone for participating. It was a wonderful course, and I hope we do it again someday. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. Next up is Andrew, followed by Jeff. Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much to the leaders. Main takeaway is just a recognition that there are a couple of fundamental pieces here, and one of them, which is so appealing to me, is that all of this is founded on a total embrace of the theory of evolution, and that's almost underlies all of this. And what I think is so interesting is that he's able to take there's evolution, everything that comes with that, the survival mechanisms, adaptation, cultural influences, right? That's all part of that process, and frames it in kind of a metaphysical way. Even the myths and all that stuff, those are all evolutionary kind of products, if you will. So, and then that's layered on with kind of a divine element. It's like all of this, that process, in addition to its existence, it's all very special in a way that we can't conceive of. And so it's kind of an interesting connection between science and also recognition that something special, there's another special element. Yeah, that's very appealing. It's very appealing that he's able to tie those together. I like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Jeff, followed by Brian. Jeff.
Well, Roger and Claire and the whole team, I do want to thank you much for this. I mean, not just the time, but really the skill and the commitment and the knowledge and the exploration that you brought to this is really tremendous. And this actually, for me, this last session in particular was very powerful, because I agree with Joe and Maritza and Andrew that this is about this era that we're in, personally and together, is not just about transition. It is about transformation in some significant way. It's evolution, you know, in a big way, and so it's about the experience. I think a lot of us are going through was one of substantial and meaningful change. And so, you know, Roger, what I heard you go through there is that, you know, we have this internal set of ethics, be they instincts or morals or ethics, and we discover or we create some sort of a belief system, ideology, or religion, and it resonates with us, and we deeply embrace it. We feel like it gives our lives a sense of meaning and purpose and direction. And then some anomaly shows up, you know, something that leads us to doubt or separate from that ideology, which is a pretty stressful thing to happen. You know, we're sort of left, you know, in a tectonic, after a tectonic change with no place to stand, you know, and we sort of lose our equilibrium or balance. And what might have happened there is that we either found something about that ideology that we didn't know before, that really, you know, leads us to say, you know, that doesn't fit with my own internal set of ethics. Or maybe we found a different ideology that aligns better, and so we leave, you know, first base to get to second. You know, we sort of say, okay, you know, I'm out of here. I'm going to this other religion or, you know, ideology. Or maybe our own, you know, based upon our experience and what we learn from it, maybe our internal sense of those ethics have shifted in some way, you know, based on whatever we think we learned. Maybe our narrative changed. And I see some of those possibilities with regard to how we change, how I have changed over my life, and how we might change together, as being very profound and very important. I'll stop there, and I'll be very interested to get your sense of, you know, if I've captured it, or you know, is something that I've said not the right way to think about it in some way.
Okay.
I actually, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, I think that's a pretty good way of looking at it, because I actually, yeah, I guess what resonates with me is this idea, like you said, that we have this ethic, and then there's that something kind of pulls us away from actually following that path or that ethic. And all I could think about was it's our awareness of our own vulnerability, right? That's kind of the story of of Genesis, is that the reason we can't walk with God is to walk with God would be to ignore our own vulnerability, is to ignore the fact that we are vulnerable, we'll die, we'll suffer, and, you know, all those things. But because we're of our own self-awareness, it stops us from doing the things that even internally we know we should. All you have to do is ask yourself, why do you lie? Why aren't you the most ideal person within your own mind? It's like, well, it's because sometimes doing the right thing isn't the convenient or fun thing. It's something that's really going to hurt you in a very serious way, so you avoid it, right? And then that, out of consequence of that causes a bunch of other isolations. But yeah, no, I think you're on the right on the track.
Next up is Brian. Brian, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to first of all thank everyone: Shrikant, Roger, Victor, Claire. This has really been transformational for me, very meaningful. Even though Jordan Peterson's the headliner, I get a lot out of listening to what others have to say in the breakout rooms and the takeaways. That really, really helps me. I have a couple observations taken from feminist psychology here at the very end. Just as last observations, triggered in some extent by what Jyoti said about death. and going to the grave. So Jordan Peterson has talked about reactions to chaos, and that one way to react is fight or flight, but there are other ways to explore the chaos, the unknown, which inevitably arises. And so those are management techniques, different ways of managing the unknown. Of course, there's this element of fear involved, and fear can lead to fight or flight, as has been oftenly flagged. But feminist psychology flags another response that can be instinctual, and is seen and really been demonstrated as being instinctual more in women than in men, and that is to tend and mend if confronted with an anomaly, rather than fight and flight. So it's just it's a management technique. Each of them dealing with not a harm that has occurred, but a risk of a harm that could occur. Also, and this ties more into what Giotto was talking about, and that taking things to the grave and things that have happened a long time ago. And basically she was talking, I think, about mistakes. I think the feminist psychology is one that points out that it's probably not healthy to be a perfectionist. A healthy way one of the healthy takeaways from, I think, feminist psychology is that, yes, as a woman, all possibilities are open to you. There's nothing you cannot do, nothing you cannot have. But you cannot have everything and you cannot do everything. That's really not available to anyone. Now, that means that there are choices in life, and again, it's probably better not to focus on the things that you've done wrong or the things that you haven't done. Maybe it's better to focus on the things that you did do right, or the things that you properly left undone. And in helping to prioritize in that way, feminist psychology points to taking care of those who are closest to you as a good way to prioritize. So your children, obviously, but in general, people who are relying upon you, either because of circumstance or agreements that have been entered into, are something to prioritize on. And you should celebrate the ways in which you have honored the ways in which other people depend and rely upon you, and that you should celebrate that often, rather than dwelling on what hasn't been done, the good things that have been done. So, for example, at the end of the year, you don't make resolutions about what you're going to do better the next year. You think about all the great things that you've accomplished in the past year. And then when you get to the end of your life, hopefully you've been celebrating a lot. So the only things you've got to cover are only over the past few days. And it'll be a big celebration. And people will miss you because they won't have more celebrations. So there's more to say about mistakes and all that, but that's really all I've got for right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. So we're going to just go for, give everybody a chance to speak, and then it'll be Victor, Claire, and Roger. And then we're going to talk about what we're doing with Beyond Orders. So Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. And many thanks again for Roger, Claire, and Victor. This journey has been very interesting. As far as looking at things differently and self-development. I remember that one of the first Roger Peterson videos I saw, he started talking about Jesus on the hero's journey. Jesus on the hero's journey, I'd never thought of it that way. But so it's been interesting to examine these things. And I know in our breakout room, we were talking a little bit about Islam and Christianity. And I know in one of my Stoicism groups, we talked about the parallels between Stoicism and Buddhism. And I think this is maybe something, Shrikant, you might want to consider. I know it's a series on comparative religions or whatever, but as far as transformations, we need to learn how to get along and understand each other. Many of you know I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and this war stuff hasn't worked out too good. But so many times in religion, we just create others. And the only solution is to start killing people. So I just have hope, but it's been a great journey so far, and I'm looking forward to the next series. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so now Victor, Claire, and Roger, what are your thoughts on this series? Okay, so let's see, Victor.
Well, thanks, folks. This has been an amazing journey, and it was rightly timed because it's a blessing that I actually found 52 Living Ideas just before we started this series, and gave me an opportunity to go through the material again, and at the same time, the idea of discussion. So that has given me more in the discussion groups to see the material, to see the ideas from another person's point of view, and especially see this group has a different set of, they are already coming from a good background, meaning different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of books, and bringing those ideas and discussing those. So that actually gave a lot of perspective for me, and Rogers and Claire's insights into the ideas that Peterson is talking about. So those actually helped me a lot. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jyoti, you wanted to make a quick comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell the team, Roger, Victor, and Claire, I did not know anything about Jordan Peterson until I came to the groups. And your eloquent presentation really got me interested in learning about the ideology of self through his eyes. And I really appreciate, because you also got me interested in learning about Christianity, because I I did not know too much about Christianity, but now I have a book by my nightstand that I read every night before I go to bed, and it's making sense to me now. Whatever you were talking, it brought light in my eye, in my heart, that I said, okay, that's why this happened. The connections became very clear. So I really appreciate, definitely I appreciate. And Victor, your little graphic designs and about the mythology and what have you, they are going to stick with me forever. I really appreciate that, and I'm going to continue to continue to attend these sessions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. And yes, Victor, you did a fantastic job with those with those presentations. I mean, it's just way out there in terms of just the whole sequence. And today, the way in which you put all of them together, that was great, because it was a great way of kind of recapitulating. So that's the power of visuals, that you can do that far more effectively than in words. So I think you've done a fantastic job. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next up is Claire. Oh, Claire has left. Okay, Claire has had to go. Roger, what did you think of this?
Yeah, this was an amazing opportunity, and thank you guys all for giving it to me, because it was the funny thing was, as I was making this presentation about things that are meaningful, I actually genuinely realized, I'm like, I spend quite a bit of time on these slideshows and I don't notice the time flying. I sometimes forget to eat. I get very, very engaged in it. And similar to Juti, like Peterson, I was raised Catholic. It was never an appealing thing for me. I had never saw any real value to the myths, and it's not until with like Peterson, even this year, because I've been into Peterson for a while, but it wasn't until this year that I started to really see a very different lens. And for the reason when I was presenting, I would always highlight lenses, is because for me, that is what Peterson's massive takeaway is, and the massive skill that you can really master is once you understand the idea of maps, and then you understand that humans are a thing that can collapse from a map and then create a brand new map, then you start to understand that we have the capacity to create these maps. And this was something I didn't quite close because he didn't close in this lecture, but Maritza, I'm sure you know from the other lectures that later on, that's the theory he develops, is that if you truly understand that we are the things that create the map, that the lens that then shapes the rest of reality, then if we just collect as many lenses as we can, whenever we engage any problem, we can move through the different lenses. And it's almost like he's more of a meta postmodernist, which is the idea of, yes, there's an infinite amount of interpretations, but the more interpretations you have access to, it's not as though they become meaningless. You use that idea of connecting to see what they all have in common, and through consilience, you can actually get a more accurate representation rather than a less. So rather than the postmodern view of everyone has a different interpretation obscuring, it's like, no, if everyone has a different interpretation and all those interpretations start to still reflect on something, then there's definitely something there. And it's this idea of, for me, it changed how I view reality, how I view myself, how I view the world, how I view ethics. So it's really transformed me in a very different way. And hopefully I was at least somewhat clear in conveying at least the starter kit for how to get there, because Peterson doesn't quite make it easy, but it's been an amazing opportunity. And thank you all for coming in every week. And thank you, Shrikant, for how much work you do. I have no idea. I actually had a joke in my presentation, but I took it out about time, where every event has to happen at a specific time. I was going to say, except for you, because somehow you've mastered time travel and can be in multiple places at one time. But yeah, no, your work's impressive. And thank you everyone for all the support. Thank you, Claire. It was actually her idea to bring in slideshows, and Victor, like your designs and art is just amazing. I could never do any, like, you've seen my quality slideshows compared to yours, and like I can't keep up.
Wonderful. No, I think this is great. Roger, thank you very much. And I think what you did was that you made very complex ideas accessible. You managed to kind of break it down. And I know how slides work, and I'm a very big fan of writing and working on, now I'm using slides quite a bit. What it does is that they actually, you commune with the slides, because you put your best thoughts on paper, including the figures, and then you start manipulating them. And in the process, you actually explicate more of yourself than you could possibly do. So that's why it's like communing with yourself using external mirror. It's like looking at a mirror of your ideas or of your maps, and you can manipulate them outside of you better. And you are able to bring more perspectives on those maps that you put on the slides than you can do within your own head. So it's been a fantastic series. So we have to top this, folks. And that's what the book is about, because we cannot forget that, like, the foundation of all of it is the work of Jordan Peterson. And it is him and the richness of his ideas that is the bedrock on which we are built. We've done a good job of building. I also want to say that the discussions that everybody has brought, thoughts that everybody has brought, comments that people have made in the breakout rooms, in the takeaways, questions, they're just out of the world, and they provide a much richer background to the core that Roger, Claire, and Victor have put in. And they make it incredibly richer, not only for everybody, but also for these guys, so that it makes it worth their while, because they know that they're going to get this kind of rich feedback back. So I want to do the same thing even more with this Beyond Order book, okay? So what I'm doing is that I'm using some of the one key idea that I have used in my New York meetups in order to turbocharge this community. I think the Jordan Peterson community is what shall I say? Because Jordan Peterson is a philosopher and he's using this consilience across many fields, and many of you are deeply steeped in that, there is a common vocabulary that we have developed that enables us to talk about matters far deeper, far more complex than you would otherwise be able to do. So in this 50, I love all the meetups that I do, but I think this Jordan Peterson community, because of the commonality of Jordan Peterson's thought, we've been able to create a much deeper community. And I want to take it one level further with this Beyond Order book. So what we're going to do is that firstly, Claire and I are trying to publicize this. So we expect, instead of getting like maybe 50 people on an average, we'll be getting 100 people pretty soon. Okay, so it's going to be much larger community. Secondly, what we are going to do is that we are going to, the format that we have designed is that we want you to read the book. So please read the book with us. Think about the book as deeply as possible, and then come prepared to talk for 2 minutes. Not about the chapter as a whole, but what is it that you got from the chapter? That was the deepest thing for you, most profoundest thing. So be prepared to talk for 2 minutes. It's not a requirement, it's a voluntary, but you get more by speaking than by listening. So please come to speak for 2 minutes. So we will get takeaways from the chapter from dozens of people for 2 minutes each. In addition to that, I'm going to have facilitators, people who know Jordan Peterson really well, who are we are going to choose 3 questions for each of the chapters. So we will go into the breakout rooms. We're going to expand the role of breakout rooms. We're going to move it to 30 minutes where we'll have a moderator, a facilitator, who will take you through those 3 questions. Again, the same rules for the breakout rooms, keep on topic, be brief, be courteous, same rules. But we're going to have a much more focused breakout rooms. So we get a lot more done in the breakout rooms on the 3 questions. And then when we come back, we get to share our takeaways, probably for just a minute, and you can put a question on the table. We will identify the themes that come in, between 1 to 3 themes, and then we'll discuss that. All right. I think this is going to take it to a completely new level. I have about a dozen facilitators already lined up for doing the facilitating within the group. So it will be like a little mini meetups for 30 minutes. Each of the facilitators will bring their own character, own way of doing things. All of them are basically committed to these principles, the four rules that we have. And then we will have 3 really good questions on that. So that's what is going to happen. And so we're starting that next week, 1 week from today, March 4th. So don't forget to order your book and get started. If anybody has any quick comments, I'll take them, or questions. Questions, not comments, questions. All right, very good. So next, on March 4th is going to be the introduction that we're going to be doing, introduction or preface, whatever he chooses to call it. Everything before the first chapter. We're not doing the first chapter, anything before the first chapter. If you don't get your book on time, you can watch the video that is linked to in the meetup, where Jordan Peterson introduces the book and reads out excerpts from the introduction. All right, so thank you very much, folks. And we look forward to a second level version of this, starting next week. All right. Thank you very much, folks. Bye.